Thank you very much. It's an honor to be speaking with you this morning. The topic of my talk is mental health, stress, and resilience, prevention and treatment through a consciousness-based approach. There's a worldwide epidemic of stress and mental health disorders that needs to be addressed on a large-scale basis in every country around the world. Just in the United States, almost 50% of adults in 2016 sought out mental health treatment. As you can see from this slide, in the middle three blue bars, from the age groups of 18 to 25 to the groups over 50 years of age, there's a systematic and very substantial increase in mental health treatment among just citizens in the United States. And we're not alone. Virtually every single country in the world, people complain of stress, bad crowding, noise, pollution, poor diet, lack of exercise and activity, marital problems, work problems. All of these contribute to mental health disorders. This is a psychosocial model that I'll very briefly go through, showing the effects of stress on mental health and physical health. On the far right, the outcomes are physical health of chronic diseases, for example, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, cancer. Underneath, the topic of today, mental health disorders, which involves post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, and other psychiatric disorders. The middle box, psychological distress or psychosocial stress, is now seen as a major contributing factor to virtually every chronic illness that people have. This is different than about 25 or 30 years ago, where it was only the major traditional, more physiological and behavioral risk factors that people were worried about, for example, in terms of heart disease. But anxiety, depression, fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and other psychological distress variables are now seen as contributing factors to adverse physical health and certainly major contributing factors to our own mental health disorders. Where does this stress come from? We've heard very well from the previous speakers where they come from. There's social and environmental stressors, including housing. Socioeconomic status is a huge factor. We've known this now for 2 or 3 decades. Socioeconomic status, in this case, means low income and or low education. This gives people less access to health care, and in and of itself is a major contributing factor to psychological distress. Certainly, we're now well aware that lack of social support is a major factor in terms of major chronic diseases. Behavioral factors, which we heard very well in the first presentation, are large contributing factors to all chronic diseases. And these were covered very beautifully in summarizing poor diet, inactivity, obesity, sleep problems, major problem today that health researchers are just really emphasizing, and certainly substance abuse that we've known about for a long time. Preventative care is crucial. And we see in this green bar here that we need to intervene early. We need to intervene when people are young in order to stem this epidemic of mental health and physical health disorders. If we're unsuccessful, then we're talking about treatment. Treatment for anxiety disorders, major depression. We hear a lot everywhere in the world about trauma. Certainly military or combat trauma that I'll talk about very soon is a huge problem in the US and throughout the world. But trauma is not just war-torn trauma. Trauma, as we heard earlier, is related to adverse childhood events, social events, the trauma of seeing violence in your own neighborhood. These are common everywhere. So what we're going to do is very quickly look at the main ideas of this lecture and go through some of the research. Both treatment and prevention are necessary to create a disease-free society, which should be the goal of every healthcare practitioner around the world. Maharishi Ayurveda, which is the most traditional form of holistic and comprehensive approach to both prevention and treatment, includes mind-body behavior and environmental approaches. Central to this traditional system of healthcare is the consciousness-based approach of transcendental meditation, which directly enlivens the body's inner intelligence. This is an evidence-based prevention and treatment modality. There are well over 350 published studies in leading medical education, psychological rehabilitation studies that have been going on for 30 years. It's been shown to effectively promote mental and physical health, increasing longevity and quality of life within the individual. Consciousness-based education, what is it? It's a process where the mind is taken very effortlessly, very naturally, from the surface level of thinking to progressively finer, more quiet levels of the mind, lesser excited levels of the mind, until one fully transcends all mental activity, experiencing a fourth major state of consciousness, transcendental consciousness, the state of least excitation of consciousness. We now know through physiological research and other research that there's an infinite source of inner intelligence within the mind and body. And the experience of millions of people practicing technique is that it lies within our own subtlest and least excited state of awareness. Let's look at prevention for a few minutes. This is a photograph of over 800 students from several schools gathered together in the San Francisco public school system practicing transcendental meditation. How do they look? What's going on inside of their minds? What's going on in their physiology? What's going on in their brain research? Subjectively, they're experiencing a very deep state of rest while fully alert, fully aware of noises, the people next to them, but it doesn't interfere with the transcending process because it's a natural process drawn by the natural tendency of the mind to experience these finer levels of activity, finer levels of the mind, which are levels of greater charm. There's been well over 30 years of research in public and private schools in the United States and around the world, showing improved student academic and social emotional development and improvement in the emotional development of administrators and teachers. This is all relevant to the topic of health, topic of the conference. Academic achievement, graduation from high school, is related to mental and physical health, risk factors, and ultimately to the disorder itself. Decreased absenteeism, decreased rule infraction, decreased suspension rates in terms of student school behavior, extremely important to the mental health of the student. There have been well over a dozen very good controlled studies on the emotional health of students, published in leading journals, medical journals, and psychological and education journals, showing reductions in anxiety, anger, fatigue, overall psychological distress, emotional problems, etc. At the same time, there's good news. At the same time that individuals reduce in their psychological distress, they're increasing in positive health factors, increased resilience. Resilience means the ability to overcome challenges It means the ability to overcome stress. There's research on self-esteem and self-efficacy. How we feel about ourselves and our own self-worth matters in terms of physical health, in terms of mental health. And it's not just the students, it's the teachers as well, showing reductions in emotional stress, in burnout that we heard about before. The primary factor in burnout is emotional exhaustion. And at the same time, they're also increasing in their own positive mental health, such as resilience and emotional intelligence. There's decreased psychological distress in students. This is a slide showing a multi-school matched control study that was published in the Journal of Instructional Psychology in 2013. This is another study recently published in Contemporary School Psychology showing both decreased anxiety and improved resilience. The results here in these factors were also found to be highly associated with the regularity of practice. While all the students in the meditation group combined showed these factors, those that showed the lowest outcomes on anxiety, those who showed the highest increase in resilience were those who meditated most regularly. And teachers reduced burnout, stress, depression. This is again a randomized control study published in a top medical journal from the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system in the United States. There are over 40 countries around the world today where this specific consciousness-based approach is being practiced by literally tens of thousands of students twice a day, every day, during their school day. Brazil is one of them. There is a very wonderful school project that's starting up in Brazil. Over the next 4 years, it's expected that there'll be over 2,000 students regularly practicing. So we'll have to expand the first photo. 800 will seem like a small number at that point. We also took a look at decreased burnout in academic physicians. How many of you are healthcare providers or associated with the field of health today? Burnout is huge. I hate to say that. My doctoral student just finished a randomized control study at one of the major medical schools in the country, University of Loyola, Stritch Medical School in Chicago, where top academic physicians volunteered to learn TM immediately or after 3 months. Those who learned immediately compared to the waitlist control showed very dramatic reductions in burnout, emotional exhaustion, and insomnia, very important point in terms of quality of sleep that we heard about. We also did a recent government program with employees, administrators, and staff, government wellness program, randomized controlled trial with over 100 government employees showing the same factors. A second paper that's in review now showing improved brain integration during TM and meditation compliance over 90% regularity. I wanted to just mention this one community-based program in Uganda. These are people, they may not look that impoverished here, but believe me, when you saw the beginning photos where they're carrying their infants, and they're meditating in the beginning with their infants on their lap because there's no place to put their infants while they're meditating. This is a community center that they're coming to. Randomized controlled trial, 50-something women learning TM immediately versus waitlist controls. What were the results? Within 3 months, there were very dramatic reductions in perceived stress and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is important. It's how you perceive your own competence, your ability to meet challenges, your competence in terms of whether you feel you're employable or not, whether you can live a good life. The researchers did a 1-year follow-up, and the same subjects reported improved physical and mental health. Most importantly, over 30% had gotten meaningful employment during that time. Post-traumatic stress disorder, huge problem again, everywhere in the world. I want to just very briefly touch on some research, all randomized controlled trials on transcendental meditation in prison populations, in Congolese refugees, and in veterans funded by the Department of Defense. Male inmates, study of about 180, 90 in each group, showing significant reductions in trauma symptom severity over just 3 or 4 months. If we look at this one table, accompanying the overall reduction in trauma were significant reductions in depression and anxiety, and very importantly, sleep problems. In women, a smaller study, randomized, still extremely important, also showing reductions in trauma stress symptom severity. This is one personal experience. I feel so open and have gained such a deep sense of surrender to my life. This is someone in prison. They're not going anywhere. This one person's not going anywhere for a very long time, but this is how she feels while still being incarcerated. A deep sense of surrender to my life and the feelings surrounding my incarceration. I no longer feel imprisoned. I now feel my prison from inside of me, my freedom from the inside of me. My relationships have blossomed and grown so much since I began using meditation. I now see the positive in the people around me, which has been such a life-changing energy to me. We saw in the men's study, we're writing this up for publication, there's a scale we use called criminal thinking or cognitive errors, where the inmates, prior to meditating, attributed their bad luck, as they call it in prison, to external environments, to others, to authority figures. 3 months later, some of them are still doing that, but most of them feel that it's really related and they're taking personal responsibility and rethinking the whole situation. So cognitive errors get resolved as one starts feeling this bliss and unboundedness. War refugees in the Congo. Everyone is concerned about refugees around the world. We need to do something positive. These are individuals who were in their refugee camps outside of the Congo, and they volunteered to learn transcendental meditation that they probably never heard about, probably didn't even know anything about meditation generally. What happened to them? In the left-hand side of the graph, this is all baseline. This is before even the first instruction in meditation. There's a slight gradual improvement in their trauma symptoms over a 90-day period. And then the right side of the graph, they finally meditated. And right away within the first 10 days, which covers the initial core course in transcendental meditation, there's a very dramatic drop in their trauma symptoms that continued to decrease over the next 2-3 weeks. I wanted to just take a couple minutes and talk about a $2.4 million funded study by the U.S. Department of Defense that we just concluded at the San Diego VA in California. This is part of a presentation that I made to the Military Health Systems Research Symposium this past August in Florida. This is the largest military conference in the U.S., perhaps around the world. What happened over a 3-month period? Of course, randomized control, extremely well designed in order to be able to get this kind of funding. This is the first study and the only one that I still know of that compared a meditation approach, a stress reduction approach, to the gold standard psychotherapy. What I want to convey to you in just a few seconds is that prolonged exposure, seen in the middle kind of yellow-orangish line, is the gold standard. If you're a veteran and you go to a VA in the United States seeking therapy, you're probably going to get some form of cognitive behavioral therapy, most likely prolonged exposure. It's going to involve what's called trauma-based therapy. The very first 30 minutes of your being with the therapist, you're going to have to start relating your entire trauma experience and start dealing with it. You're going to record your trauma event. And for many of the people in the study, we're talking about horrific events in Afghanistan and Iraq that they have to recount, that get audio tape that they listen to every night for homework. I asked one of the therapists, I said, I know this is intense for the participant. Is it intense for the therapist also? Guess what? It absolutely is. We compared that to transcendental meditation that doesn't involve anything to do with the participants recounting their trauma. The TM teachers don't ask them about their trauma. They simply teach TM exactly the same way that these students in the San Francisco public schools were taught transcendental meditation. The technique itself, because of this transcending process, reduces hyperarousal. The individual gains a deep sense of relaxation. The brain waves become more coherent. We just found out the other day from Dr. John Fagan that also there are at least 6 genes, in terms of gene expression, that are down-regulated during this practice that are related to stress. All these things are going on simultaneously in the physiology as the individual just closes the eye and enjoy this transcending process of greater relaxation. The 2 treatments, meditation and prolonged exposure, were compared to a third PTSD health education group to control for what's called time and attention. What do we see in the graph? We see that within the first 4 weeks, there's a very dramatic decrease in the meditation group. The other groups, it takes prolonged exposure, and then after about 6-8 weeks, they begin to show improvement, but not at the level that's being seen with transcendental meditation over the 3 months' time, and certainly not the red bar health education.
Professor?
Yes. Okay. There is a significant decrease in trauma symptom severity, averaging across all time periods in transcendental meditation compared to prolonged exposure and compared to PTSD health education. The graph on depression is almost identical to the trauma. Reductions in severe depression symptoms occurs within the first month of practicing TM. Clinically, over 60% of the people practicing transcendental meditation showed clinically meaningful or significant reductions in trauma over the 3-month period. So I mentioned possible mechanisms for the outcomes in terms of decreased hyperarousal, as seen in this brain activity chart. Also, prior research had shown decreased hyperarousal in terms of the HPA axis and also the sympathetic nervous system and the gene expression. So you'll have to be a speed reader to see this one patient perspective that we're going to include in the American Journal of Psychiatry. But the behavioral changes in this person were just remarkable. Prevention programs for students and teachers, parents, healthcare providers, government workers, business administrators, and staff are necessary to reduce psychological distress. Studies indicate that large school-wide programs and large community-based programs with the collective twice-a-day practice of transcendental meditation and the TM City program can help reduce crime and societal conflicts. There are nearly 30 major studies showing this collective consciousness effect, and the effects can be seen within the nation and around the world. There's an earlier presentation by Dr. Orm Johnson going over the research. Finally, offer transcendental meditation and other Ayurvedic programs as a first-line treatment for PTSD and comorbid depression in medical clinics and hospitals, prisons, and other institutions in our community. Thank you very much.